In order to know Salisbury, you need to go back in time to what life was like before.
All the history of Salisbury, from the foxes to everything else, the people have been very industrious.
The early 1900s, the fox industry took off leaps and bounds.
Some of the men that were big in foxes did make a lot of money, as far as that goes.
Once Fred Kobitz got into it, everybody in this community had foxes.
If you could imagine that there were 30 ranches packed into this small community, that was quite something.
That's how well Salisbury became known worldwide.
When the Acadians arrived in the large Salisbury area in the 1730s, they were mostly from one single family, the Broussard family. The Broussard family was an Acadian family that originated from Port-Royal in Nova Scotia that became Annapolis Royal. Those Broussard families came up the Petitcodiac River in the 1730s. They settled in the Salisbury area. Cajuns generally settle in small hamlets. Usually brothers of the same family would marry into another family with sisters. They would share the land. They would use the marshes, the salt marshes, with dikes, the famous abattoirs, and you needed a lot of manpower to really manage this sort of agriculture.
The Salisbury region would have attracted the Mi'kmaq people to that area because of that diversity that we find amongst the species of plants and animals and the fish that you see. Mi'kmaq people, we knew and we've had contact, trade relations with others long before the French and the British came to our shores. When the French came, they had access to metal pots, and so we started trading and getting metal pots for us to cook with. The Acadians have influenced our culture as well too, because we're sharing and using what is available, and we were quick to adapt to what they had, because it made life living on the land a little bit easier for us as well too. There was 2 waves of fur trade. So in the area, the first wave was with the Mi'kmaq and the French. We knew access to where the animals were, how to trap, how to hunt them, bring them back, share those furs with the French. We had that peace and friendship, and we, helped them survive those first winters here on this new land, a land that they weren't accustomed to.
The Acadians were a very prosperous people before 1755 when they lived in what is now Nova Scotia, or even in this area of New Brunswick along the Petitcodiac River, along the Memramcook River, and along the Chipouty River. They even named this regions Les Trois Rivières, the Three Rivers region. They were unfortunately in a very contested land between 2 major imperial colonial powers, the French and the British. The British owned Nova Scotia. The British wanted the Acadians to swear an oath of allegiance to the British king. The Acadians didn't want to get mixed up in a war where they would have to take arms against maybe their Mi'kmaq neighbors, against members of their family which were on the French side. So they preferred to remain neutral. The British, who were not very numerous in Nova Scotia before 1755, had to accept this sort of fact. But after the foundation of Halifax in 1749, the tables have turned. The British are now more powerful. They have the new capital, which is Halifax. Instead of being just a few hundred, now they are in the thousands in Nova Scotia. And they have a better military presence. So when the new imperial policy is decided in London that the British government wants to get rid of the French presence in North America starting in 1754, 1755, one of the major element of that plan is to get rid of the Acadian problem. If the Acadians, for a last time, when the British administrators will ask them, will you swear an unconditional oath to the British Crown? If they say no, you will expulse them. So there's a decision taken in Halifax by the British colonial government of Nova Scotia. The Acadians are to be expelled. The orders to British officers are to go up the rivers and capture the Acadians that are here, that are fleeing in the woods.
It was the Mi'kmaq people that took a lot of those Acadians and took them inland and hid them in the woods so that the British would not take them because they were family to us.
But at the end of 1758 and early 1759, they surrendered.
With the expulsion of the Acadians, the British pretty much, sent all the Acadians away, which that was their main source of trading for a lot of these furs. So afterwards, you see with the 1752 truck houses starting to come up as a way for us to sell our furs, sell our craft work, and to continue that economy movement back and forth, trading of those resources. So that the second wave started with the Mi'kmaq and the British to start building those relationships and selling our furs to the British.
In 1774, the first permanent settlers of Salisbury arrived from Yorkshire, England. They settled close to the intervals along the Petitcodiac River, benefiting from the cultivation and diking left from the Acadians. Omitting to formally notify officials of their settlement, the unknowing government issued a 9,000-acre grant to Martin Gay and Associates in 1783, stripping the Yorkshires of their land ownership. The Martin Gay and Associates Group's primary purpose was to sell their grants to the United Empire Loyalists, who were seeking land in the area. This grant made up most of what Salisbury's core is today. Over the next few years, many of these partners went on to sell their lands, earning much less profit than originally expected. The Yorkshires, still protesting the issuing of the grant, were compensated by the newly established Government of New Brunswick. Many Yorkshires remained in Salisbury and played a huge role in the development of the area.
Salisbury was perfectly located to grow over the years due to its geographical location. The railway and the road network is one of the main reasons for Salisbury's growth. Construction of the European and North American Railway began in 1853 with the primary purpose of providing a fast, efficient way to move freight from Shediac to St. John. Having this export route pass through Salisbury transformed the local economy and connectivity.
It was the crossroads to Fredericton, St. John, Halifax, and Albert County. And it was a rail station, and that got you to Maine, Massachusetts, United States, etc.
And that definitely took the silver fox industry to a whole new level.
The origin of the silver fox industry, you must begin with the fact that it was a very rare pelt. People thought of raising silver foxes, but it wasn't until Charles Dalton of Tignish, Prince Edward Island, really set to work to try to do this. And he had a partner, Mr. Olton, who was from Little Chimagui, New Brunswick. And as they went along, they had to take in 4 more partners, partly because Olton and Dalton needed some extra money to build these pens, the wire of which had to come from Europe. And they became known as the Big Six. Overnight, breeding stock sales began, and that you might call that the silver gold rush.
Some of the men that were big in foxes did make a lot of money, as far as that goes.
By 1911 and 12, a pair of breeding foxes was selling for upwards to 15. The record price was $28,000 a pair.
So you imagine in the 30s paying that kind of money for something. And I know my father paid $13,000 to buy his farm.
The Big Six became millionaires overnight. This industry was just, expanding and went worldwide.
A silver fox.
Silver foxes.
Silver fox. But they're actually the largest fox species that we have in the world.
In the year 1914, there were foxes in this area.
You have to realize that the fox industry did not begin in Salisbury, which a lot of people somewhat still believe. It all started in PEI.
The first that came to Salisbury was with Armour Brown, a Mr. Gowland, and a Mr. Trites. They got together and bought a pair of foxes. And at the same time, Fred Colpitts had gone to the island, and he too, he actually bought 3 foxes.
2 females and a male. Once Fred Colpitts got into it, everybody in this community had foxes.
And by 1920, he was one of the largest fur producers in the British Empire. World War I sort of dampened things a bit. Certainly the Great Depression had an effect.
When the price came down after the war, that's when local people, the ordinary citizens, could afford to buy furs. And once the furs could be bought by normal people, the elite didn't want them anymore.
The mentality of everybody changed so considerably. The things that mattered before didn't matter anymore.
Once the economy picked up again, decades after the war, that's when Connie and her partner Pearl decided to take interest in the fox industry.
We went to the fur sale, and that really, when we got up there and saw the furs and went to the auction, and it's just bang, 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 bang with that hammer, and somebody says 10, somebody says 15, 15, up, bang, sold. It's interesting just to be in there. And Pearl and I were in the business just as observers in the beginning, and then I said, you know what, we need to buy some foxes. And she said, well, we'll go down and get some from Uncle Lee. So we went down to Uncle Lee, and Uncle Lee said, this is no business for girls. You don't want to be in this business. And that was just a red flag for the both of us, like, don't say don't to us. And I never saw her speak to her Uncle Lee quite as sharply as she did that day. And she said, Uncle Lee, I'm upset. You're selling foxes to total strangers, and I'm asking to buy foxes, and you won't sell them to me. And she said, that's pretty upsetting. And he said, well, Pearl, there's nothing left in pups that I would sell you, but I will sell you my skips and losses. At least if you don't have any pups from them, they'll make a good pelt. And so we drove from Lee's to my father's house, and we told my dad this, and Dad immediately said, get over there and buy however many you want, because Lee's skips and losses are not a problem. Everyone strives to try to get somewhere near a 3 as an average at pelting time of pups. And that year, our average was 5.75, an unheard of number. So we were in the business overnight. Instead of having 60 pups, we had 100 pups. That meant that we really basically had 40 animals that were available to sale as breeding stock, and that's exactly what happened. The live fox shows. That was the fun thing. We traveled all over the Maritimes to go to those. They had a live fox show in the island, and one in Nova Scotia, and one in New Brunswick. And it was a lot of work, but when you had some good foxes, it was nice to put them on the table and have the judge of the day send you to the top of the table. One year at the New Brunswick show, I think we won just about every award that was to be had. And it wasn't long after that, in fact, that we packed it in. It was me that reminded Pearl that, what her Uncle Vernon had said, the time to get out. And Pearl was reluctant, and I was too, in a sense. But by that time, the anti-fur people had come on board. And I just knew from my position on the board of directors of Canada Fox Breeders, I just had the sense that this is not just a hit and run kind of thing that's going on. This is going to last, and this is going to put the fur industry out of business. I said, we've done everything we set out to do. We've topped the sales at Hudson's Bay 3 times. We've topped the live fox shows. We've got one of the finest ranches in the country. We've got one of the biggest ranches in the country. What else is there? We accomplished everything we set out to do. And pretty much, this is no business for girls. We turned that one upside down, in spades.
So how did that make you feel, the fact that you got told at the very beginning that's no business for girls, and you were able to build?
I just think we knew we could do it, and we were going to prove we could do it.
Like Connie and Pearl, many Salisbury citizens profited from this booming industry.
But I think the most underrated effect that it had in the long, long run was education. I remember Pauline Bissett had done an article on us on an old journal called the Riverview Recorder, and she talked about our, foxes coming back to Salisbury. Anyway, I'm walking by the corridor and Dr. Edger comes out and he calls me and Connie, come in here. We've just been talking about you girls. And it was, we were girls back then. And I walked in and Edger says, we've got the paper talking about you fellas being in the fox business. And we were just saying that if it hadn't been for our fathers having a few foxes in the backyard, we'd have never been able to afford to go off to university. It allowed diversification. It allowed farmers to get out of just farming a couple of hogs and keeping a couple of cows and selling a bit of milk. It allowed them to diversify into herds of beef, pork, dairy, etc., etc.
That's how one of the ways my father built up some income to start expanding his operation. And it was just a few cows, and he would have had hogs and everything. And but he was a hard worker and entrepreneur for his day. He just kept digging and working and building. And when he got to start selling milk in Moncton, that made it so he had a regular income, and he just grew from there. One of my first memories, of course, would be when I was only about 8 years old and I was driving a tractor like that one. But that's what you remember as a kid. But there's a lot of memories made on a farm. And you start out, they give you little chores when you're small and feed the little newborn calf and things like that. And it just develops from there. Well, you learn right from the time you're a kid a lot of little things, how to look after animals and take proper care of them, and how to feed them, and how to grow crops to feed them, and there's a lot to it. My father's family were a very close family, and but really right here local, there was mainly only 3 of them, my father and 2 brothers that started on their own, and but they worked together because I guess that's the way they were brought up, and they helped one another when they needed help. And that went on for a good many years. I can remember them coming to our place, and my father would send me to one of my uncles to help do things later and so on. But they all grew, good-sized farms too. Yeah, some of the lessons I learned from my father was his work ethics, for one thing, and he always taught us honesty, which will carry you a long ways. And And as he progressed, and he built his first barn when I was 10 years old, and everybody told him he'd never live long enough to pay for it. He did pretty good in those number of years.
With the growth of businesses came more traffic. In the mid-1990s, Irving Oil wanted to build another truck stop in the region.
They started looking at a bare field north of Salisbury. However, that property was owned by Victor Lewis, and there were several attempts made to purchase a piece of that land, and Victor Lewis did not agree. So after several attempts, Arthur Irving went to his chief lieutenant, Les Gillies, and said, Les, if you can attain an agreement, I will build you the biggest big stop ever. And they did. And that's how the big stop happened to be located in Salisbury. Now, my son was the chief engineer. He was required to be on the site and was the chief operations officer for the building and the site of the big stop. So he would be down here for several days at a time, and often he would call me, because they lived just local, to come out and spend the day with him and see how it's going. So the longer I did that, the more I got attached to the big stop and thought, being a resident of Salisbury all my life, possibly I could help promote it. I just went there. I wanted to do something to get out of the house because I had retired, and I planned to go there for just a year or two, and however, 18 years later, I was still there.
When Doug started working at the big stop, there was 3 names on the Wall of Fame.
The Wall of Fame was a brainchild of Arthur Irving and his public relations staff.
His goal was to honor people of Salisbury who were able to achieve great things.
When I started my involvement with the big stop, I looked at that wall and I said, well, there's a few more people that should be on it. So I was instrumental in adding Stacy Wilson, who was the star hockey player for Team Canada, and then Lieutenant General David Oblinus was a schoolmate of mine, and he went up to the top rank in the Air Force as well. And then after I'd known Victor Lewis for quite a while, then I looked back at his history and realized that he became a champion in not one sport, 3 sports. So Victor Lewis, who helped me research some of the others, is also on the Wall of Fame.
Salisbury brought up a generation of people that were achievers. All the families have lived here for years. So there's that sense of family and camaraderie, pride in accomplishment, and so on.
I guess Salisbury is special just partly from the number of people I know and people we've worked with and so on over the years.
It's progressed quite a bit. It's nice to see all the new businesses starting to pick up here too. It's becoming a very active little community.
And it doesn't matter how small a community is, if individuals have the background and the initiative, they can achieve great heights. It proves the motto that I put over the top of the Wall of Fame is that small communities produce great people.